Hello class and welcome to week 3 of Experience Design 2. Um, Today we'll be talking about touch points. Touch points are, well, let's go into it. Um, so covered in today's lecture is what is a touch point? How is a touch point different than a channel? How touch points are different across products and services, identifying touch points, designing for touch points, and finally unifying touch points. And I just want to say, before we get into all of this, that terms like channel and touch point, they're not strictly defined, and there's some gray area with the definition of them. Sometimes people use the term channel and touch points interchangeably. This is because sometimes they are the same, but a lot of times they're not the same, especially in digital. So, don't drive yourself crazy trying to strictly define what these things are. That being said, I'm going to try to strictly define them so you at least get an understanding of what they are. So a touch point is a point where a customer interacts with the brand, or company, or whatever. You might think, well, that sounds a lot like channels, but channels. So hang on, let me just define this a little bit more. So a touch point is any interaction, including encounters where there is no physical interaction, that might alter the way that your customer feels about your product, brand, business, or service. So that's quite broad if you think about it. It encompasses a lot of different things, and they're not all the same. Some are like channels, unidirectional. Your interaction with them is by viewing them, like a television commercial. And some, like social media, are highly interactive. But it also extends to the physical world. So the appearance of the store, the customer representative, all that kind of stuff is considered a touch point. It's a point where a customer actually interacts with the brand in some way. So some examples of touch points: speaking to customer service, using the company's website, emailing the company, seeing the company on social media, entering a retail location, seeing a billboard. And I just threw this one in because it's kind of an interesting. It's not even the product itself that's a touch point, which of course a product is, but nowadays this is, I think, become only big, and as something that people worry or concerned about is the actual unboxing experience. As you probably notice that higher end premium brands have nice cardboard boxes and not plastic blister packs for some reason. And the reason for that is because getting something out of a blister pack is an incredibly unpleasant experience. You often end up, kind of gashing yourself on the rough plastic edges or dropping the product when you try to pop open the pack. So, it might seem like a small thing, but, like, for example, Apple, my go-to with regards to all this kind of conversation about channels and stuff like that, they are the masters at packaging. Even their accessories like power bricks and things like that, they come in a relatively nice little paper box, and there's usually a little pull tab that allows you to open it easily. This is like very different from many of their competitors. So here's what we talk about. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. Touch point versus channels. So we just talked a little bit about touch points, and they may seem very similar to channels. So let's try to figure out what the difference is, so you can kind of get your head around it. A channel is where the touch point takes place. There may be many touch points in a channel. A channel is broad. You could say YouTube is a channel, but there are many potential touch points in this channel. So if you think about YouTube, the video itself is a touch point. The upvotes and downvotes is a potential touch point. The comments are a touch point. This is interesting because, as we'll discover later, there's touch points that you can control as a business owner, and with the internet, there are touch points that are outside of your control. So we'll talk about a little bit about that later. A company could post video about their product on YouTube, but then a customer could post a review video of that product as well. And even though that's outside their control, it still should be considered a touch point. To really simplify all this, channel can be seen as the medium of communication, while the touch point is the interaction on that channel. Yeah, so like think about the channel as so it's easier to talk about these things in specifics. So you could, and this is where some of the vagary comes in, you could consider social media overall as a channel. And obviously there's many different ways to interact within that channel. There's Instagram, there's Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. Nowadays you may want to consider like Facebook a channel, right? So there's some grayness in what's defined exactly as a touch point, and what's defined as a channel. I think it's probably easier if we think of the touch point as the very point of contact rather than something broader. So channel is the broader description, where touch point is the actual point where the customer touches the brand in some way. That should make it a bit clearer, I hope. And as I said before, not all touch points are controlled by the brand. For example, customers can post negative comments about your product on social media. And even though this is beyond your control, it's still a touch point and should still be monitored and considered as part of your array of touch points with the client, the customer. That being said, even touch points beyond your control can still be managed. For example, if somebody makes a social media post about how the product you make was received it was damaged or wasn't working or something, and they're very unhappy, you can manage this by replying to the post saying that you will send them a new product. And so this happens quite a lot. This is called social media management. And so big companies will have teams of people that are scouring, Twitter and Facebook and other places. Facebook not as much because it's a bit more closed off. Twitter is a big one. Looking for negative posts, and they will often contact the person directly and say, if you take down your post, we'll send you some brand new product, or we'll give you extra product. Or they'll post directly if they're that's a little bit devious to me. It's you see that happening on Amazon a lot. Like I bought some products from Chinese companies seems for some reason it seems to happen with these Chinese companies more than anybody else. I've bought products on Amazon, and they have a card that says if you give them a review, they'll give you a discount off your next purchase if you give them a positive review. And I've seen posts where people have posted negative things about their product on Amazon, and they changed their thing to 5 stars because the company sent them something new and said, we'll send it to you if you improve your rating. So this is manipulative. I'm not 100% crazy about that, because I think it's deceptive to some degree. What some other companies will do will actually deal with it in a very transparent sort of way. So if somebody posts a negative review, they'll post a comment to that review saying, we're very sorry that you had this negative experience. Like, let's make it better for you, and contact us here, and we'll get this sorted out for you. So that way, the negative comment stays up there, but you can see that the company is taking measures to try to improve the experience for the customer. So let's have a look at how touch points are shown in customer journey documents, because you're going to be asked to make a customer journey map, and it's good to see what they look like. And I think that looking at these will actually explain it way better than all the words I'm using to try to explain it. The one thing about customer journey maps is they're all kind of different. You have quite a bit of creative freedom of how you produce them. They're usually a line going from one to the other, but sometimes they're a circle to indicate that they're sort of like a continuous ongoing process. Either format is kind of acceptable for a customer journey map. So you see this circle, and it's split up into, and we're talking about this from a design viewpoint, like what can design do as part of the customer journey? What involvement does design have with the actual touch points? So you see pre-service experience, during service experience, and post-service experience. So pre-service experience is like what happens, what are the touch points before the person purchases your product or service? And so here we have like space design, so the exterior display of your store, identity design, logos, channel signs, carrier bags, advertising and graphic design, bus, subway ads, TV, magazine, etc., etc. New media design, that will be website, apps, banner ads, and I don't know what an SNS coupon is. Excuse me. You know, during the service experience is exterior parking, the identity design in the space itself, shopping cart, basket, stroller. You know, how easy it is to like, just say it's a grocery store, how easy it is to get the shopping cart and move around. That's a brand touch point, even though you might not think about it. In-store graphics and promotions. For new media design, you have like kiosk display info. So you, like nowadays, you see lots of these big digital boards at food kiosks, and that's pretty a recent sort of channel, a new touch point. There used to be static signs, you know, where people would put those little numbers in to represent price and all that. And now that like even McDonald's has these giant video screens that communicate information. The post experience is, you know, it's kind of similar, you know, in terms of space design, identity design, advertising, graphic design, and you know, the new media design. You have website, apps, banner ads, etc. But you also have what they haven't included here is reviews, people commenting on forums and blog posts, etc., etc., etc. So the post-service experience should capture, which is not really shown in this chart, the new media kind of environment that people will be responding to your product, either favorably or unfavorably. I think that's very important to add. If we go on to this one, this is more of a traditional sort of customer journey map. You know, I think it's great because it's very straightforward. You know, they've broken it down into not just 3, but it's like 5 different things here. So there's like awareness. So that means you get becoming aware of something, and that's usually traditional, you know, unidirectional advertising. There's consideration. It's when you start thinking about, you know, whether you're going to purchase it or not. There's the actual purchase itself. There's retention of the customer afterwards. Of course, you know, not all companies are totally interested in retention. Retention is if you think that you're going to be able to sell that customer more things in the future. And then hopefully at the end, advocacy. And that means that the person likes the product so much, they talk about it with their friends, and they convince their friends it's a good thing. So, you know, if you look at the squiggly line that kind of cuts through this, you have, you know, brochure for awareness, magazine article, press release, online ad, word of mouth, direct mail. You have the consideration portion, which is, you know, checking out reviews, going to the website, going to an event site, purchase. You know, you have to register online and create an account a lot of times. Retention is the online community, like I pointed out. You know, you go and you know, if you're angry about your product, you go and you post a negative tweet about it, or you love it. You know, the funny thing is, online you only get people who love or hate a product. Anybody that's sort of in between can't be bothered to post. It's one of the kind of bad things, and that's one of the things that I noticed that when I'm looking at reviews on Amazon, I have to kind of like go, where's the middle ground here, right? The people that love it just love it too much, and the people that hate it seem to hate it way too much as well. The advocacy part, well, that extends onto social networks. You see that this is kind of fuzzy, this part here. Blog posts, and of course, word of mouth. Word of mouth is probably the best form of marketing. You know, somebody telling their friends, I got this thing and it's amazing. Now this one is kind of the same thing, but what I like, they've done 2 extra things to it, which I think is important. The top of the graph, where the squiggly line goes to the top, are the specifically digital touch points, and the ones below are the physical touch points. And I think that's great to point out. I think that's, you know, I think this really captures the whole ecosphere of channels and touch points. Also, they've indicated as well the managed touch points and the unmanaged touch points. So the managed touch points are a solid color, and the unmanaged are like a stripy, not quite filled in thing. So that's good to know as well. So you know, you have awareness, which is PR, which is, I think, I'm not sure why PR is not managed, because it sort of is, but maybe it's the perception of the way people receive PR. radio, TV, print, outdoor, so traditional advertising, word of mouth, which is totally not managed. It's funny they have word of mouth here on awareness, where the other one had it at the the the, the end, like the words loyalty here. Um, you know, I think it can fit kind of in both places. Like if you imagine that this person started their journey hearing about the product from a friend, so it can be at the beginning and the end as well. When we loop into digital touch points, we have online ads, viral email. I'm not sure this graphic's probably a little bit out of date. I'm guessing that could translate to Facebook posts, digital billboards, search, landing page, blogs, third-party sites. So that's in the consideration phase. Physical touch points or direct mail. That's actual real physical mail. The store, call center. The websites always feature big here in the purchase or consideration phase. It depends on whether you purchase on the website or not. Like if you're buying a car, it would fit squarely in the consideration because you can't actually buy maybe a Tesla you can, but most of the time you can't buy a car right online. You have to go to a dealership. Mobile, if there's an app associated with the product. IM chats, for maybe help. Call center for help. Loyalty promotion on invoice, blog, email, newsletter. So that's like sending you regular email newsletters, which just between you and me, I hate them. I have to cancel them. It's like I buy something somewhere and like I just bought a winter jacket from Macaj and they're sending me one every 2 days. It's like they make winter jackets. It's like I only need to maybe hear about them once or twice at the beginning of the season. I don't need to hear about them all the time. Anyway, I digress. Why do you need to understand touch points? Well, if we want to improve the interactions with our customers, remember this is experience design, we're thinking about experience design, we need to be able to identify where those points are that we need to design for, right? And, because and this means you have to understand your customer, your client, you have to understand the people that are buying the product or service, and you have to understand where they are in the ecosphere. If we want to improve interactions with our customers, the key starting point is to understand what those interactions are and where they take place. Without that understanding, it would be impossible to measure any improvements or indeed see if any changes made to those interactions are having a detrimental rather than positive effect. So you might have a channel where it's actually having a negative effect on the brand association with your customers. That's obviously a bad thing. So these touch points have to be monitored. Traditional touch points are a little more difficult to monitor, like a TV commercial, if it's on YouTube, the metrics can be easily understood. In the olden days, they had to rely on the Nielsen families, the Nielsen ratings, to get feedback about how well an ad was doing, which is not completely accurate. It's kind of fuzzy. So touch points are the kind of the key lifeblood of if you're doing experience design for a company. And we're thinking about the experience not just on the interface itself, but for the whole customer experience, which is what we're talking about this semester, the whole customer experience. We need to identify those touch points and make those touch points as good as possible. So here's a little graphic. It's kind of complicated, so I'm not going to dive into it too much, but it just calls out a few things that I think are worth talking about. So it starts here with traffic sources, search traffic, direct traffic, etc. It talks about analytics. It's important to have analytics is measuring how many people come to your site, how far do they get, when do they leave, how long do they spend on there. Every website can have them. Google provides something called Google Analytics that is quite detailed and can give you a good understanding of what's happening when people come to your site. You can especially identify pages where people drop off a lot. That's good because you can go and look at the page and go, what's going on with that page? Why do they hate? Why do they leave after encountering that page? And it could be a bug. It could be it just the page is too confusing, or a lot of times it's when they see the shipping cost. This also talks about people visiting the websites and how you should collect personalization data. Which I think is important. I'm of mixed minds. User tracking doesn't sit well with me. You can see that Apple. Sorry to talk about Apple so much. is coming out pretty strong, trying to, especially just recently with blocking third-party cookies. This is like getting Facebook very mad, because this is how Facebook kind of targets their advertising to you, and they won't be able to target if they don't have those third-party cookies. But I think there is positive things you can do with it. Like, for example, if you think about Netflix, when you're using Netflix, it used to be better. It's not as good anymore. But generally speaking, like if you look at my Netflix homepage and you look at somebody else's Netflix homepage, the content on it's going to be different. And it's because Netflix is attempting, poorly I might add, but they're attempting to kind of show you content that you may be interested in. If you go to YouTube and you go to, you actually signed in and you go to your homepage, it does a better job, but I have issues with their personalization as well, but they try. So based on like the last few videos they watch, they try to show you other videos that are similar to that. That's a good user experience. It's remembering you. It knows who you are, right? It's, I think it's worth having a longer discussion about, whether this kind of rabbit holing, based on your decisions and kind of excluding other content out, whether that's a good thing for us. I think that it can be argued that, what happened in the States with Trump and the Republican Party could be attributed to, Facebook and all these other companies using algorithms to only push content that you're interested in, which means that you get further and further into your own silo. Anyway, that's a whole digression. We should think about the morality of the things we do as designers. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard and consider what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. I think that if it's a service that I'm paying for and it's trying to show me stuff that I want to see, I think that's a good thing. I think if it's Facebook trying to track me across multiple different sites so that it can target advertising to me, I'm a little less happy about that. Anyway, so this is something we're going to talk about in a second. It's about unifying channels as well. So like this kind of keeping user data enables you to do things like ease the flow between touch points, in order to be able to have a consistent experience across touch points. And just remember, for what do we need to understand about touch points? For every brand, product, and service, the touch points will be different depending on the context of use and what service the customers are using. So there's so many touch points. It's almost an infinite number of touch points. So what do you focus on? What do you think about? Well, one of the things is, I talked about putting television ads on that are for a client base that's mostly like a millennial client base that's not watching cable TV. That's a waste of money, right? So it's like that. If your product or service is appealing to a highly technically competent audience, that are on Twitter a lot, then Twitter is a place that you have to consider for doing experience design. You have to make sure that that's managed in a way that fits with your brand. But having blog posts say that nobody reads, that's probably a waste of your energy and probably not helping. So you really have to kind of consider, like, is this channel where the customers are, and is it worth kind of investing in the experience design for this channel? And what's the best way to do it? Because it's going to be different. It's going to be different if you're trying to do it on Facebook, or if you're trying to do it on Instagram. Even those two, they're social media and they're very, very similar. The way that you market to people, or the way that you deal with touch points on both of those are quite different. Instagram has influencers, which doesn't really exist because of the fragmented. On Facebook you're logged in, you only see your friends' stuff. Instagram, if your account is open, which a lot of people's are, anybody can see your stuff. So it's a different sort of ecosystem, and that enables influencers to kind of exist there where they don't so much on Facebook. You get thousands and thousands of Instagram followers, and that allows you to have an audience and a platform for which to talk about a company's products. Anyway, we could probably do a whole class on Instagram and influencers. What do customers expect from touch points? They expect it to be appropriate, that both the context of the interaction, the cultural tone of the interaction meet the needs of the customer or user. They expect it to be relevant, that the function performed by the interaction meets the utility requirements of the customer or user. So yeah, if you're posting stuff that's not relevant to your customer base, it's not super useful. Meaningful, that the interaction was perceived as important or purposeful by the customer or user. This means And this, I'd go further. It means injecting value. I think that this is another kind of way of viewing this stuff, is that if a customer is using a touch point, they must perceive some value in it, right? There must be a takeaway for them, or they're not going to interact. This is what we have to think about all the time, because in order to overcome friction sometimes, because friction can be minimized but not completely removed. For example, if you have an app, it's kind of a big ask these days for somebody to download and install your app, because it takes you have to go into the app store, you have to find it, you have to download it. It's a bit of a pain in the butt. Not a huge one, but enough that it's put people off. Like in the old days, people were downloading apps like crazy. Nowadays, it's a bit more like pulling teeth to get people to install an app. Now, if you want somebody to install an app, they better get a sense of value from it when they've installed it. That's what killed, people, like I said, used to download apps like crazy. Like I downloaded a koi fish pond in the bad old days, and people were downloading all kinds of silly, crazy apps. But what ended up happening is a lot of these apps started, even the minimum value they were promising, just fish showing in a koi pond, that was all I was asking for. That's what I got. It was an entertaining and kind of experience. The market got flooded with all these apps that didn't have much value, and you're like, shit, why did I download that? And you end up deleting the app. So if you're going to put an app out there and you want people to use it, make sure it provides value. Endearing, that the interaction created some form of bond with the user or customer, for example, through desirability, create delight, or playful tone. Sometimes value can be created just by being playful and fun. So don't think that's secondary. To create a good user experience, sometimes a bit of levity can make all the difference in the world. So unifying touch points. We touched on this earlier. For touch points to be truly effective, the transition from one to another should be as seamless as possible. If it feels to the customer that they're starting from scratch whenever they encounter the next touch point, this will lead to bad user experience. And this is funny because I think I spoke to this about switching channels, but it equally applies to touch points, and probably more importantly to touch points. It's not always possible to kind of create a seamless transition, but you should try your best to do that. And I got a couple of examples here and a couple of ways of thinking about it. These mostly apply to digital because, like I said, the only way, for traditional media like billboards and TV, the only way for you to create like a good user experience is to sort of remain consistent in your application of those. So if you see a television ad and then you see a billboard, they should feel like they're part of the same thing. So there should be a level of consistency there, so that when you switch between those touch points, you feel like you're in the same place. So that's like, the interaction there is very light. You're looking at something, you're just kind of seeing it. It's a brand experience, but it should be consistent across all. But in terms of digital media, whether it's two-way communication and we can store data and stuff like that, you should think about unifying touch points in kind of two broad categories. That's personalization. We talked about that a little bit before. So, you go to Amazon and it shows you items you might be interested in purchasing based on your past purchase history. That's useful. That's helpful. You know what I mean? Like that's a good thing, right? And if arguably, you look at something at Amazon and you're on the web surfing somewhere else and you see ads for that product again. You could see why they're doing it to sell the product, but it might be useful. You might have forgotten to purchase it and go, oh yeah, I do need to get that. That reminds me. So there's things like that can create kind of a unified approach across touch points. Customer relationship management. This is CRM. This is the term that's been big for a long time. This is where things, it can be super useful. It can also be kind of a bit intrusive. But, from my example, I used this last week and I'll use it again. When I use the TD banking app, if I run into a problem, I can hit a button inside the app to call them. And when I call them, the representative that picks up the phone, they already have my data. They know, excuse me, they know my bank account information and can help me right away. I don't have to go through a whole process of punching in 100 numbers before I speak to them. So for me, that's a great experience. That's a great experience, like across platforms, across touch points. Um, and so that's the kind of thing you'd be trying to do. Obviously, it's not always possible. Like if you're transitioning from Twitter to a company website, the tone and the messaging on Twitter could be the same as your brand, which is good. But if you've had a discussion on Twitter, if you go to the website and ask for help, are they going to have access to that? Maybe, maybe not. It depends. There's tools for trying to help assist with that, but your Twitter user account isn't associated with your login with the client. So I'm sure over time they'll figure out ways to kind of like make these things more seamless. But yeah, so that's touch points. That's it's taco time. So yeah, don't get too stressed out about it. Like don't these are terms you will hear in marketing a lot. So when you get out, you're going to hear about channels and you're going to hear about touch points. I think traditional touch points are a lot more straightforward. The newer digital ones are a little more complicated and ever evolving and ever changing. You guys are young, you're digital natives, as they like to call it. You are probably better able to navigate this than most senior marketing people at this point. So think about when you're online and when you're on Twitter and when you're in social media or wherever you might end up, Reddit even, I'm a big Reddit fan, and just think about, oh, this is a touch point. Like just be aware of when you're hitting an experience with a brand, and you'll probably notice it more like I've said in the past when it's a bad experience, but just kind of keep your eyes open and pay attention because it's, I think you'll start seeing it more and more, and you'll start seeing where companies are trying harder to get better at it. All right, so thank you for joining me, and we'll talk to you next week.